It's wonderful to see you all this morning. I'm Kim Conniff-Tabor. I'm the editorial director of the Democracy and Culture Foundation. We run the Athens Democracy Forum, the Art for Tomorrow event in association with the New York Times, and a series of projects that seek to help make democracies more resilient. And I'm delighted to be hosting this discussion today with a group of star panelists. I feel very lucky to have them. We have Soli Özel. He's a writer and a professor at Kadir University. That's my right. Yeah. Then we have Nataša Vučković. She's the executive director of the Center for Democracy Foundation in Serbia. Dawn Nakagawa. She's the executive vice president of the Berggruen Institute in the US, all the way from California. And we have Dr. Karolina Wigura. She is the member of the board of the Kultura Liberalna Foundation and a professor at the University of Warsaw. And right now she's also a fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin. So when I received the title of this panel, Rethinking Liberalism, the Revenge of Emotions, I was intrigued, but I was also a little bit mystified. I was thinking, whose emotions, whose revenge? But I know Karolina, and I'm familiar with her work, and it turns out the idea did come from an article that she published in the Journal of Democracy in 2020, and an essay that she also wrote later that year. And in that article, she outlines the role of emotions in populist politics. She argues that the onslaught of changes in the last 30 years, economic change, technological, political, the pace of change has led to an enormous sense of loss. And if you add to that cascading crises of the last few years, people are feeling overwhelmed. Her argument is that illiberals are better than liberals at understanding and harnessing this sense of loss. They translate it into fear, and they claim that their policies will offer citizens an escape from that fear and the promise of a better life. Liberals, on the other hand, haven't been able to fully understand and acknowledge that emotion. If they want to succeed, they need a compelling counter-narrative that doesn't ignore or reject people's sense of displacement. But I'm sure you don't want to hear it from me. It's better to hear it straight from Karolina. So Karolina, I was hoping you could give us just a quick overview of your theory and an update, because obviously a lot has changed in the last few years. Also, February 24th has happened, and that's marked the end of the world as we know it, as Masha Gessen has written, and as many of us have been saying here over the last few days. So I'm just wondering if you could update, and let us know if your theory, if you needed to revise your theory at all, and where that stands. So I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim, and also thank you for having me here. There is a beautiful book by Annie Ernaux, a French writer and intellectual, which is called La Place. And the book starts with a scene of a funeral. Annie, who is always a character, the main character of her own stories, approaches the coffin, and she sees the body of her late father in the coffin. And she says, the first word that comes to my mind when I see this is guilt. So where is the guilt coming from? She says, I will tell you about my childhood. And she dwells into this exorcism of memory in which she shows how from a little girl in a provincial city, town of France, not well educated, definitely not affluent, she grown to be an international intellectual writer. So this is a great success, isn't it? But at the same time, it's a great loss, because she loses on the way the language to communicate with her father, with her families. She loses the ability to communicate with her former friends. She loses, last but not least, the possibility to spend the late years of her father's life together with him. And when I read this book, I was very much sure that this is a book about France, but it actually could be about Poland, it could be about Czech Republic, it could be about Greece, Germany, whatever you wish. And this is what the essay for the 2020 April edition of GOD was. It was about the past 30 years of an enormous change that brought many nations more affluency, a great success in the case of my own country, Poland, and also a great success in the case of Central and Eastern Europe. But at the same time, this great success also was paid for with enormous loss. But for an update, I must say, when I look now into this text, I think, well, at that time we were thinking about the feeling of loss that was already in the past. So we were grieving for something that already happened. Right now, the pace of change has become so prompt that we are actually dealing with an ongoing loss. And this is something completely different. So you also probably have the same feeling that you wake up every day and you think that the framework of the world has become different. And I'm not only meaning the pandemic of COVID-19 here, but also, obviously, the Ukraine war. So the pace of change has changed profoundly. It has become more prompt. And as we are dealing with the ongoing loss, and it's so difficult to grieve for something that is ongoing, isn't it? I think there is another emotion that is collectively grasping our hearts, and this is simply fear, anxiety. So fear has become the emotion of my region, of Central and Eastern Europe, who is afraid of the Russian imperialism coming again into the heart of our countries, but also simply globally. It seems to be a much more intense emotion than before.
Thank you, Karolina. I'll come back to you about what do we do about that enormous sense of, well, the fear and the loss, but I want to move on to Dawn for a moment here. Dawn, I would like to know your thoughts on just kind of this overarching premise, but also as someone who's based in the US, and you've witnessed the rise of populism there, the election of Trump, the events of January 6th. I noticed that with your colleagues back in 2016, you were already writing about the rise of the strongman and the exploitation of fear. Do you think this is a useful framework that Karolina's talking about for explaining the rise of populism?
For sure, certainly. And I think that what she referred to as the pace of change, it is really important, I think, to understand that the cycle time of history has sort of collapsed on us, right? We used to have a crisis, we used to land in a new place, we used to have a place called the new normal, and it feels like we can't get traction because the changes keep coming so rapidly. So I think that fear is different. It is a new kind of uncertainty. Yesterday I was listening to a panel with Faye Hobson from the Saltzman Institute, and she described this time we're in as VUCA, and VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I thought that was really an interesting, a good way to frame it. But I think that sense of loss that people are feeling, if you look at the politics, we mistake our polarization, I think, too often to a partisanship or to politics. But if you actually look at the lines that divided the political divide in Brexit or in the Trump election and probably in other elections as well, it's very much demographic. It is very much the old versus the young, the urban versus the rural. It's like the past and the present, or the past and the future. And there are some people who they see their way of life slipping away. It's not reflected in the culture that's emerging, and they feel like they have no place in it. And I think that there is a resentment for, and there's a real resistance to that kind of change. And so you see this pulling apart of society along these lines, and then it falls into politics. So the fact that, I know the sort of title of this is that the liberals haven't really captured a way to talk to people about these changes. That's not by accident. I mean, it's simply a very challenging time to connect with people when the sense of loss is so real for them.
Mm. Well, it's as if the rug has been pulled out from underneath all of us, and so there's this just profound sense of instability. Soli, I'm going to turn to you. I'll go back to you in a moment, Nataša, but Soli, you had been talking yesterday a bit about the elites and the problem of the elites. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on that, but also let us know your perspective about Turkey and how Turkey fits into this construct, and how Erdogan playing on emotions and winning, potentially winning support, and the role in the current crisis.
Thank you, Don. Let me introduce first the way I look at these things. The problem with liberalism is that it is impersonal, and based on what Karolina has written, we need a sense of personal relations when everything about us is, it's like in Marx and Engels in Communist Manifesto, everything that's solid melts into the air. And that is a very difficult thing to actually deal with. And if you feel all alone, and she identifies fear, suspiciousness, and uncertainty, that drive you crazy, and you can only find solace in community. Therefore, you return to an imaginary or an existing past, and you try to find some kind of solidarity with a community that you presumably know. And in my judgment, part of the problem that we have witnessed, we have analyzed infinitely, was this populist movements and how they actually gave vent to accumulated rage of those segments of the population that felt left behind economically and that felt left behind culturally, or at least felt that their own cultural mores, the way they lived their lives, was scorned upon. So those resentments have exploded, and it gave Brexit in Britain, it gave Trump in the United States, and it may very well give us Le Pen tomorrow, at least in the first round in France. In Turkey as well, a well-entrenched elite, unfortunately also represented definitely from 1960s onwards by a military that had its own caste-like mind, had imposed its own way of seeing things on a population that for a certain period of time maybe bought it or accepted or acquiesced to it. But as Turkey developed, became more urbanized, market relations expanded, new elites have grown, and an alternative way of looking at things was possible. The time and inequality in the distribution of resources and power became so flagrant, the country was ripe for a reordering of things. And I think the genius of Erdogan, who came from Turkey's Islamist movement, but unlike the traditional Islamist leaders, actually sensed the brewing rebellious mood of newly urbanized peasants, if you will, because he himself was actually a product of migration in a big city such as Istanbul. He canvassed it, and he also took advantage of the total failure and ultimately collapse of the old order in 2001, mobilized sentiments, mobilized emotions, but it wasn't all negative, and that'll be my last point. It wasn't fear-mongering. It wasn't playing on suspicions. It wasn't taking advantage of uncertainties. It also promised something better.
Yeah.
And because the old order was collapsing, that promise actually resonated, and indeed, for a long time, he was capable of delivering, and that is, in a way, the secret of his success until now.
I think that's a really good point you make about the promise of something better. It's not only tapping into a fear of things getting worse, it's, okay, I'm going to give you a vision of what could be. and the solace in community, I think, is very important, but also this idea of a leader in a role as a protector. So thank you for that. Nataša, on to you. So your organization, the Center for Democracy Foundation, pushes for democratic reforms and EU-oriented reforms in Serbia. You've just been through an election cycle with the re-election of President Aleksandar Vučić earlier this month. So I was hoping you could talk about how emotions figured into that campaign, and what is the fine line the leadership is trying to walk in your region.
Well, first, it is a pleasure to be here at Delphi and to be with all the panelists at this panel. I would like first to say three layers of problems that I see as crucial when we assess liberal politics today, and how do actually populists respond to that, and what do they offer. To my understanding, you know, the liberalism at the end of the 20th century, it really shaped new individualism, and it opened new domains of freedom at one point. On the other point, it actually raised uncertainty, particularly through the regulation of labor markets and by creating this uncertainty, fears, insecurity at a large array of people within the society, which, coupled with the economic crisis in 2008, with high austerity measures at first years, which actually gave the ground for this populism that we have to get today in European countries, because actually it gave the populists the opportunity to develop the narrative. The problem is within the liberal order. It is not only your fears, your frustrations, it derives from the failures of the liberal order. It is true or not true, we can discuss it, but that was something that citizens who were victims of austerity measures, deregulated labor markets, loss of jobs, poverty in work as well, and so on, really experienced as the big problem. And then there was this lack of trust in institutions. When you see most of countries in the European Union and Western Balkans have very significant lack of trust in parliaments, governments, but very big trust in church, military, and so on. So it gives some picture about this lack of trust into institutions, and then coupled with a lot of affairs, let us mention just Assange or Panama Papers or something, it actually added to the picture that, well, the liberal policymakers are liars, corrupted, so on. So it actually added to this lack of trust to the institutions, a lack of credibility of politicians. And then the third level that I would like to raise, it is the fact that the neoliberalism actually, at the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, reduced the principle of solidarity in a society as one of the leading principles that people need to apply in their everyday life, work, economy, and so on, society, politics, and this creates this emotions that we are, yes, mighty individuals with a lot of new freedoms. We have stepped in the public sphere through social networks. We can, our voices are more heard. But where does it actually lead us to? So what is the general project? What is the vision of the society that we share? What is the values that we really share? What is the public interest in our societies today? So that is something that I think populists play very well with, because they offer consolation. National identities, religious and ethnic customs, ethnic belongings, and so on. So when you ask me about the emotions in this campaign, electoral campaign in Serbia, there were a lot of emotions, of course, because the war in Ukraine opened a lot of issues. First of all, very close relations, historical and cultural, with both nations, Ukrainians and Russians on one side. Then the solidarity with Ukrainian people, of course, who have been attacked and subject to this of this aggression. And but it offered actually political parties on the right side of the political spectrum a very mighty narrative against the Western orientation of Serbia, pro-European orientation of Serbia, and so on. So this is a very big playground now, and I think that it is going to be for some time. What is very important is that it is my understanding that Serbia shall really show its commitment to its European path, and show its decisiveness to follow the European policy.
Thank you for that. So I think that we've established, you've all pretty well established what the issues are, what the problems are right now. I hope to turn our attention to what to do about it. And Don said something yesterday that really struck me. He said, there's no going back. We have to sort of let go of this idea of there's some utopia in the past that we can hearken back to and somehow get there. And you also said in a few of your notes to me that you think that liberals who embrace progressive values are going to find it hard to also embrace the traditional communities who are associated with various forms of intolerance. So I was hoping you maybe could talk a little bit about what we do and how do liberals acknowledge the fear that we've been talking about without rejecting it out of hand and create a compelling new story. What are some of the ways that could potentially happen?
I can most comfortably talk about the situation in the United States, so I will keep my comments to that because I don't really understand the dynamics as they're playing out in other places, although I think both Soli and Natalie did a great job, Nataša did a great job of helping us understand it. My sense is that, part of the solution is, or part of the problem is that the civic architecture has sort of disappeared, at least, if you look at we've become a much more secular society. Churches are closing all over the place in the United States. The Boy Scouts have been discredited and so on. So there's all these institutions that used to connect communities that no longer do. And I think that sense of alienation is compounded by the sense of loneliness as well. People aren't connecting. And of course, we've replaced those connections with social media and what's online, and that is not the same kind of connection. What we have are teenagers with, rates of anxiety and depression like we've never seen before, and so on. So it seems, I think the answers to this sort of digital malaise is actually very analog. I think that we have to start trying to replace that civic architecture. We have to connect people in communities. How to do that, I don't know exactly. We certainly have some ideas in the programs that we're developing, but I truly believe that that is the answer, making people feel seen and feel acknowledged and feel connected, I think, is how you build resilient communities and how you overcome some of that sense of alienation that people are feeling. Now, how you do that, I don't know exactly. It's not easy, but I do think that is how we get past this moment of fear that we're in, is really by connecting with people. Now, in terms of the narrative, though, I think in the United States, the Democrats completely abandoned the ground game in district after district. There literally were areas of the country where not a single Democrat was running, and so the only people you could vote for were Republicans. Now that started to change in 2018, and they called it the blue wave, and they really started to assert themselves into communities where they had been completely absent before, and I think that has helped. I don't think they've come up with a compelling narrative, as this, the overarching theme of this is, and I think that is a problem because not only because we're in a moment where narrative matters way more than facts. That's where we are today. People can dispute facts and find their own facts, so narrative really truly matters, but the narrative that we've relied on in the past of like hope and aspiration and values and so on, again, it's not connecting with people where they are right now. So they truly do have to find a new narrative, and I don't honestly have an answer for what it is. But something about connecting people and actually taking action to do so, I think would be the right direction.
Okay. Karolina, do you in your work have ideas for how to do this? I mean, you talked yesterday about that we're not only talking about emotions here, but we're talking about actually a set of shared values, and how can that be communicated and exploited, actually?
Yes, I believe that whereas a couple of years ago, it was really mainly about the skill, the ability to address emotions, and you had this discrepancy between the populists who were quite skillful in addressing the feelings of loss, helplessness, if you like, fear. It's exactly what Soli said, that Erdogan, neither Erdogan, nor Kaczynski, nor Orban, ever only concentrated on what's negative. They actually proposed something positive. Erdogan openly spoke about love for Erdogan, love for Turkey, love for a community. So this is one thing. In the past, really, it was about emotions, and liberals were not only not skillful, they were also reluctant to address emotions, and let's say for very good reasons. For good reasons, because the most important experience of the Second World War and what was before Second World War was that emotions might be very easily manipulated. They can lead to vicious nationalism, and that's why the liberals were so reluctant, and I do understand that. From this time, however, we are already quite distant, and I do believe that today the biggest dispute is about values. So both sides today, whether populists or liberals, are already capable of addressing emotions. But the clue is who has the values that are convincing for us as Europeans, but not only as Europeans, as liberals, as people who believe in freedom. But listen, even the best set of values means nothing in today's world when it is not entertaining. And I'm very sorry to say that, but it also mustn't be boring, right? The problem of liberals a couple of years ago has been also that they have been extremely boring. And I think it's very important to underline that. We often think, yes, populists are extremely abusive, insultive, this is outrageous, but they also catch our attention. I don't say that they are making us laugh, but they do catch our attention, and I do believe, apart from what Dawn was saying, I think it's very important to find the glue for community, as you say, but also this mustn't be boring, this has to be entertaining. Look at Zelensky. Look at Zelensky. I mean, this guy, a couple of years ago, has been dancing in leather and on heels. And this is right now the most viral material, video material in my country, in Poland. People are watching that, but with respect, actually, with respect. Not to laugh on him, but respecting the person who was a comic actor and who became a national hero. National hero who is not boring, and it's extremely important, I think. Let me just continue a little bit about Zelensky. He stayed in his country. This is also very important, right? So he's shown not only the courage to be present in the news, present in Grammy Awards, for example, but he also shown the courage to stay in his own country. You know, there was a joke in Poland after 2 million Poles went to the UK after 2004. And there was a joke that in 1939, the government was in London and the society was in Poland, whereas after 2004, the society is in London and the government stayed in Warsaw. So, you know, Zelensky took a different way, and it became symbolic, and I think it's extremely important that we underline that.
I'm glad that you brought that up. I was actually going to get to that later, but since we're here, let's talk about it now. Do you think, and anybody can jump in on this question, but do you think the model, the idea of Zelensky, is that does he exhibit characteristics of a leader that work well in this time of extreme crisis? Or do you think that those are the kinds of qualities that could actually be applied in other situations and be sort of more widely accepted? Anyone want to jump in on that? Nataša, do you have any feelings about that? Well, and we don't need to continue to talk about Zelensky specifically, but just what are the characteristics of the ideal characteristics of a leader?
Yes. Well, there is a saying that crisis create leaders. Of course, that it is exactly. In a situation when you have to respond urgently to new reality around you and offer solutions, then you show as a leader or not as a leader. But I would like to go a bit further on what was just said about boring, how liberals may be boring, and I mentioned that the lack of this general project visions and some stories that will, because it was also that the old ideologies faded away and nothing left as a general idea, And so what we usually receive from the liberal politicians, those are prospects of public policies. Public policies are well-written, structured documents. They are written by bureaucrats. They're debated in media by experts with usage and misusage of statistics very often in order to show excellent results and so on. Growth is very important. Employment is very important. Maps are shown, graphics and so on. But people don't take it, particularly don't take it because very often it is not in accordance with what they're experience in their everyday life. It is very important to say and to remember that liberalism stemmed from the Enlightenment and from the new social sciences, sociology, positivism, and everything. And everything was based on data, on rational arguments, and that is something that goes with liberalism. But on the other hand, in this complex world where people are really so atomized, do you say it? Atomized? And now even more with this work and work at home and this isolation and this experience of a very dramatic isolation that have a lot of consequences on private, family life, work life, work teams, then people need to feel that they belong to the society and that this society has something that by belonging to the society, by certain groups, that they can contribute to some improvements, advancements, to the betterment of their lives. So you don't have traditional political parties disappeared, more or less, very successfully, fortunately. This center politics is very empty, and trade unions, not even to mention, in many countries completely without any role anymore. Community life is very limited, and so what is there to? So I think that we need more solidarity and more empathy in the narratives of liberal politicians.
Comrade Nataša, can I take an exception to what you just said?
I was going to turn to you next.
Look at the struggles in Starbucks and Amazon in the United States, where the union movement has been crushed. It was weakening, but I remember I was there at the time when Ronald Reagan fired 11,000 air traffic controllers just with the signature, and nothing really drastic happened afterwards. That was really the end of union movement in the United States. But look at it today. I would think we may yet be hitting even a deeper bottom, but some people are also bouncing because resistance is also there, because power relations have become so egregious. You cannot tolerate Elon Musk having $250 billion, not paying taxes, and you scrambling to actually put food in your children's table. So there is a dialectic at work there. I'm not suggesting that there will be a bounce back that will be very strong, but that there is still life in societal relations. COVID exacerbated a lot of things, of course, this sense of solitude, loneliness, and all that. And we will be living with other variations of COVID as well. But we're also finding ways of changing the predicament, it seems to me, that it doesn't look so awful. Well, it doesn't look so desperate to me, and you know, I'm not a terribly optimistic person in general either. But I really do like what the workers in Amazon did and what the workers in Starbucks are trying to do.
There's this, Don, you look like you wanted to respond to that, otherwise I'll...
Just a lot of thoughts, but just going back to the question of leadership, I mean, I think there's two different questions there. On the one hand, what kind of leadership works in this moment, right? We've seen a lot of examples of people who lead, and basically they're winning at social media. They're winning at sound bites. They're winning at grabbing people's attention for a millisecond because that's all you can get, right? Does that make for good leadership? No, probably not. But in terms of Zelensky, I mean, I think he's given, it's really interesting if you look at what's playing out. You know, he's the perfect hero. He's the underdog. You know, he's the guy with the unexpected background who rises to the occasion. And he's got this sense about him that he's everyman. You know, like he's just a regular guy and just thrown into incredible circumstances. And then you've got this arch villain who could not be a better arch villain, right, in the form of Putin. And what's playing out in the Ukraine is not a territorial battle, it's a battle for the soul of the future. You know, do we want one where autocrats win, or do we want, you know, to be a free society where people, they stick it out and they fight for it, you know? And it's just, so he's probably not replicable in that way, but is he the right, you know, leader and hero for the moment? I couldn't imagine somebody better.
But there is an element of that you said, which is he's right now someone that people also feel that they can relate to. Mm-hmm. And I think that touches on some of what you were getting at, because there's this disconnect between the Elon Musks of the world and the space race between Bezos and Musk and Jeff Koons now. And, you know, while they're off seeing who can put the biggest rocket in space, you know, there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to put food on their plates. So I think there's this profound disconnect that people are feeling with the leaders or the people in positions of power, and reaching out to the everyday man. So how do you get out? Because there is the business of governing, which, you know, does take putting your nose to the ground, and it's work, and it's work that isn't necessarily going to appeal to the everyday person, but a leader has to somehow figure a way to kind of bridge that gap. So I don't know, what are your, I know you're maybe more pessimistic, Soli, but do you have ideas for how to do that? What are the ways that could potentially be done?
Look, Zelensky, as you said, is someone who rose to the occasion. He is the person of the moment. If and when this conflict ends, maybe he will not be like Churchill, be re-elected, who knows, okay? But it is obvious that he's a person who is organically linked to his own society. And again, we talked about it yesterday as well, he didn't leave. I understand his family did not leave. And that really does make a difference. And this is the kind of person in politics that you would need. Again, if community is important, building bridges and bonds, if that's important, stopping the estrangement between the elites, both in cultural and in interest terms, is important. That's what you need to do. What I think we have simultaneously is a class conflict because of the economic system, which is also being transformed, and a cultural conflict. And those leaders that match them gave us right-wing populism. So will there be leaders that are going to use the same conflicts but use them in order to find a different way of coexistence? That is, in my view, the biggest question. So far, the picture is not bright that this is going to be happening or we will find such leaders.
Well, and what we're seeing right now is that populists in Europe do not seem to be in retreat. I mean, and maybe we should talk for a moment about the French election. If anyone can try to attempt to explain the rise of Marine Le Pen, why is that, how and why could that be happening now? Do you want to tackle that, Karolina?
Yeah, I would love to. I think this is a matter of time, simply. Emmanuel Macron has risen lately as a leader because he was constantly dealing with international politics. He does it very well. He did it always very well. He spoke to Putin, he went to Moscow, and this was seen as something very relevant and important. But to some extent, now, as the sanctions are already there on Russia, the French society starts to ask the same question that many Western societies ask, namely, okay, so when we are going to pay more for electricity and our energy, and perhaps we have to sacrifice our way of living, then who is going to take care for us? And is it really Macron? Perhaps it's this Le Pen who constantly says that she would like to protect our nation, right? So we get back to Ukraine. Somehow Ukraine is at the heart of everything today because it's really the question of how much we are going to sacrifice right now. It's and at the same time, I would like to say that I don't want to be pessimist. I mean, nothing is decided yet about France. We will see, right? But I do think that pessimism, when we have this crisis of crisis, pessimism is just a luxury that we cannot afford. And I think it's extremely important to derive hope also from the despair and helplessness that we are in. It's very important for democracies to be engaging, to find a way to be engaging. Go on Google and find the films that are advertising Russian and Ukrainian army today. You will see that the Russian army is advertised by a very gadget-like, very boring, very dispatched from any human being film. You actually will not watch it to the end. Then go and watch the Ukrainian one, and you will see how this is constructed. I am a teacher, now I'm fighting. I construct buildings, now I'm fighting. Right? This is extremely engaging. And I think it's important because coming back to this style of living, we are so much used that the Squid Game is only taking place in Netflix. You have seen Squid Game, or at least you have heard about the controversy around it, like this extremely cruel, full of killing series on Netflix. And a couple of months ago, we were all asking whether our kids should watch it or not. They were still watching it anyway. But what do we do in order to prevent the Squid Game to turn into Bucha, right? What do we do? And I do think that creating engagement in democracy in a very democratic, down-to-earth way, on really very down-to-earth heroes is crucial here. I mean, you are perhaps pessimistic whether we can replicate Zelensky, but actually his story makes me very optimistic. I think, okay, there are probably more guys there dancing in the Dance with the Stars, right? This is the contest he won. Yeah. And they probably could also have a relevant role.
They could also what? Sorry, I didn't hear
have
that.
A relevant role.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely. Nataša, you spoke yesterday about the loss of trust in institutions. You touched on it a little bit earlier. How do you think that we could somehow reestablish some of that trust that's been lost while still maintaining the importance of institutions?
Yes, thank you for that question. Well, I'm not a pessimist, and I also think, and I agree with Soli, that the society and various groups will find the way to present their concerns and fight for their for their priorities, like the Amazon workers. In my part of the world, it seems a bit different. But I think that it is important that, that we see that the values that we preach as politicians and as public personalities, that they are lived, that we offer by example, that we offer examples. That is very important on national level, but I would just like to reiterate that it is very important on the international level. Coming from a small country, so we see what is happening in other countries, and liberal order is being imported in Serbia, North Macedonia, Montenegro, from European Union and the States. And so the models that we take up and see there, they're imported in our countries. If we have a leader in the EU member state that promotes illiberal democracy, like in Hungary or in other countries, then it's a very big threat for further democratization and so on. And so what I very much insist on is that we find the ways to promote liberal values, whatever they are, in the center left, center right, but those are some let's say narratives that incorporate liberal values. And it is important to find the methods to incorporate them really in functioning of the institutions, in the political parties, because I think that we have a very big crisis of the functioning of political parties from the democratic point of view. So those are things that we have to recreate some kind of credibility and trust in policymakers, in politicians, in leaders, and in institutions.
Soli, do you want to comment on that, the idea of credibility? And because I know you were talking yesterday about this loss of credibility, this complete lack of connection again with the elites, and that the elites no longer have a connection with the public.
I mean, one of the books that had great influence in my thinking was published posthumously, Christopher Lasch's Revolt of the Elites. And it really shaped the way I look at things, and I tried to present some of those thoughts. But I also agree with Nataša. I think when the history of this period is written, more so than the Trump administration, the Bush administration is going to be on the really dark side of historical writing. Because a lot of the things that Trump had done, the ground has been prepared by the Bush administration, violating United Nations rules, violating the system that the Americans themselves put in place. That was truly the Bush administration. In Kosovo, I have some ambivalence, because we had a record, people had to be saved. It was not legal perhaps, but it was legitimate. Iraq wasn't. And nobody actually was held accountable for the incredible brutalities that American soldiers have displayed in Iraq or in Afghanistan. Nobody, so you cannot then preach to others that they should be observing or be respectful of human rights, this, that, and the other. I agree with Nataša on that.
So can I just add something? So I think not on the Iraq War specifically, but I guess I am pessimistic a little bit. I don't think we're going to return to a place where elites occupy the privileged positions that they did before. I just don't think that that's coming back. I think the world has radically changed. I think that 5,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago, pyramids popped up simultaneously in different parts of the world, and literally every social, political, and economic structure we built after that was shaped that way. But in the 21st century, what's emerging is of a very different shape, and it's networks, and they're flat, and they're horizontal, and we don't understand them. And part of that shift that we're making from pyramids and hierarchies to networks is part of the trauma, because we don't understand power, we don't understand status. on a network or in a network. And so I think these trials and tribulations that we're going through, and we will as we transition through this, in part is because we're not rational creatures who have feelings. We are feeling creatures who can think, right? So the idea of status and uncertainty and ambiguity, we're not comfortable in those places, right? Our brains look for categories. They look for things we can understand. So I think we are going to move to a different dynamic in how society organizes itself, and elites will occupy a very different space because of that.
Thank you, John. We're actually at time, but Karolina, maybe you just want to say 2 words about hope, because I know you.
I just wanted, to propose a compromise between optimists and pessimists, because this is basically who I am. I propose a compromise everywhere. And I just wanted to quote Gramsci, who once said that the pessimism of our thinking should be compensated by the optimism of our actions.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you very much for the discussion, and it was wonderful to be with you all. Enjoy the rest of your time. Thanks.